Thank you, Representative Presley. I just want for us to zoom out a little bit when we think about the kind of poverty that exists in our country. There is 37.2 million Americans who live in poverty. As I've stated earlier, we have 38 million people, including 12 million children, who are food insecure. 1 in 25 households in the US experiences very low food insecurity, where families regularly skip meals because they can't afford more food. 1 in 15 US seniors face hunger. That's 5.2 million seniors who are food insecure. 2.1 million households living in rural communities face hunger. Americans living in rural communities face hunger at higher rates than those in urban areas, and BIPOC communities are especially hard hit by hunger. Rural communities make up to 63% of the counties in the US and 91% of counties with the highest rates of overall food insecurity. In 2019, SNAP and school meals lifted 3.2 million people out of poverty. If we just look at in Minnesota alone, 432,000 people are facing hunger, and of them, 147,000 are children. That's 1 in 13 people and 1 in 9 children that face hunger in Minnesota. In April 2022, Minnesotans made 463,000 visits to their food shelves. That is a 70% increase compared to April 2021. Since January 22, food shelf visits statewide have increased by 37%. 2022 was the first year since 2014 that Minnesota didn't see an annual increase in food shelf visits. And the reason for that, Madam Speaker, is because of the pandemic relief programs. We heard from so many people from across Minnesota and across the country, and I would just like to share some of their stories on how some of these programs, the pandemic relief programs, have helped them. Eric, who's from Wilmer, Minnesota, recently shared how he struggles to provide for himself and his sibling. Right before the pandemic, his mother passed away, and he became the legal guardian of his younger siblings. Concerned about providing enough food to eat, he was grateful for the meals his siblings can get at schools because of the Meals Act. Amber, a mother from Duluth, Minnesota, shared how putting 4 kids through school has been a financial struggle. Both she and her husband work, making just above the threshold of qualifying for the traditional free lunches. When my bill was passed out of the House, the Meals Act allowed schools to provide school meals to all students, including Amber's 4 children, and she called it godsend and a blessing. Yesterday, we got an email from a school food service director for a group of 16 school districts in upstate central New York. She wrote, It's been incredibly difficult few years for school food service with supply chain issues, rising costs of food, virtual and hybrid schedules, different serving models, labor shortage, but it has been a joy and privilege to see the direct impact of serving breakfast and lunch for free to all students. Our program has grown from serving about 1,500 breakfasts and 5,600 lunches pre-pandemic to 3,500 breakfasts and 7,500 lunch per day in a school year. And the stigma of free meals is gone since we are serving it to all the children on a truly even playing field. She went on to say, the end of the child nutrition waivers, most significantly, the one that allowed free meals for all students, will be a crushing blow to our program, to our students, and to our communities. Families have come to appreciate and rely on the free meals, she says. We anticipate spending the next year having to have hard conversations with upset parents who are struggling to pay their account balances. The argument that students who really need it can apply for free and reduced meals just doesn't cut it. There's a huge gap between the income guidelines and truly being able to cover all of life's expenses, including school meals. Our school nutrition program, students and communities thrived with universal school meals. Without them, the future looks dim. That is why we are urgently asking Minority Leader Mitch McConnell to not allow for these waivers to lapse. It is detrimental for us to act and to do the right thing. We also heard from a registered dietitian and the food service director for a small rural school district. She wrote, our enrollment for pre-K through 12 is only 660 students, but well over half of them live in food insecure homes. Prior to the waivers in February of 2020, only 20% of our youngest students in pre-K to 6 ate breakfast with us. They would come in from the buses separate from their peers, singled out as free breakfast kids, while the others waited to start their day. The last 2.5 years has seen a sea change for our tiny school district. Due to the free meals for all, we are able to transition our students starting September 2020 to a breakfast in the classroom program. Every day they have a choice of a hot, nutritious meal of the day or a cereal or both options served with fruit and ice-cold milk. Students take menus home at the beginning of the month, decide on which days they would like to eat what meal. Teachers work collaboratively with the food service department to pre-order breakfast daily. Our breakfast participation has skyrocketed from 20% in February 2020 to 85% as of Friday of last week. Our numbers continue to grow, and even better, eating breakfast together as a community has become part of the woven fabric of our little district. What will September look like without these waivers, she asks. It will be heartbreaking. With the inflation we have seen reflected in grocery store prices, some of these students may well come to school with empty bellies. We would lose the sense of community, solidarity, and the unity we have built over the past 2.5 years. This stigma of needing help will be stamped upon the kids who are lucky enough to qualify, while many others slip through the cracks, unlucky to have adults in their households who make enough to disqualify for them to receive benefits, but poor enough to struggle as they balance $5 gasoline, food, and increased rent. We are literally begging all of you in Congress to please help us make our kids fed, to keep our kids fed. So many of them depend on us, and as we know, it is so hard to learn on an empty stomach. And so I will end with where I started. This is a crisis. And as I've always said, as someone who's lived in a war-engulfed country, someone who's lived in a refugee camp, who's experienced what severe hunger can look like for a child who doesn't have access to food, it is baffling to me that we see some of these stories coming out of communities here in the United States, in one of the wealthiest countries in the world. And if we truly care about our children, and if we truly care about building a future generation that is ready to lead in our country, we have to care about getting them educated and ready. And you cannot feed the brains of children if their bellies are not fed. We must act, and we must act now. With that, I yield back, Madam Speaker.
Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 4th, 2021, the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Johnson.